Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Community America Life Skills webinar series. My name is Matthew Newkirk, and I'll be one of your hosts today. We're glad you're taking a little bit of your time today from work to join us for this amazing webinar. Before we get going, I want to introduce the team that has made today possible. As I said, my name is Matthew Newkirk, and I'll be attending Mizzou in the fall to major in broadcast journalism.
My name is Jack Loudon, and I'm going to be a senior at Blue Valley West this year.
My name is Jackson Schuster, and I'll be a freshman at KU next year, majoring in economics.
My name is Eka Josa. I'm going to be a senior at Washington University in St. Louis, double majoring in biology and global health.
My name is Sam Brook, and I'll be a senior at Park Hill High School next year.
Awesome. So for those that don't know, this team and about 10 other interns have planned and hosted a series of webinars for teens throughout the month of June. We've covered topics like success, work, and most recently, money. Now, you might be surprised, but through our experience and our polls, kids are way more interested in money than you think, especially right now. And this is something we've proven over and over again. In fact, my 9-year-old cousin actually asked me a question yesterday about budgeting that was totally out of the blue. We had a great conversation about it. So on the topic of money, we'll be covering 3 broad topics today. Firstly, how small purchases add up. Then we'll be talking about, the transition from high school to college with credit. And finally, investing. So if you have any general questions, we have some time reserved at the end of the webinar to answer any of the questions you may have. You can ask them with the Q&A feature inside Zoom. Just click that little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will try to answer all of the questions either on air or with a typed response at the end of the webinar. And if you see a question that you like, we encourage you to upvote it instead of asking twice. And this will help us to get through all the questions faster, and questions with more votes will be answered first. Now, our main goal of this webinar is to give you parents a perspective of what money management looks like for teens and how you can help us. You're going to hear the perspective of the kids, people who are going to or already in college and go through these challenges daily, that have some experience under our belt. We also have some amazing speakers to join us today from Community America. We can advance the slide. That will bring their perspective as well. And here's that first statistic that you might be surprised by, and all the adults were, so you may be surprised too. You go back one slide. There we go. In a poll done by Community America, 80% of respondents across race, gender, and income, and every other metric said that when they think about money, they are stressed. And the reason for this is that despite personal finance classes and help from adults and a plethora of other resources on the internet, there's nothing specifically designed for kids. It's all written by adults for adults who are making a lot more than kids and don't understand that, maybe spending $5 at Starbucks is the number one problem that kids have, because it adds up. Seeing that bank account go down after a couple tiny purchases can leave kids confused, and that leads to stress. And the word associated with money shouldn't be stress. It should really be opportunity. And so that's what today is about. But before we get going, we want to let you know that this event, including any materials provided, is for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed are those of the presenters. They do not reflect the opinions or views of Community America Credit Union. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jack, who will introduce our amazing guests today.
So our first speaker we have is Jamal Evans, who's going to be talking about how much small spending can build up and how important teaching financial literacy and budgeting is to your kids. Jamal's been at Community America for 10 years now and is currently the branch manager at their Shawnee location. Our next speaker is Liz Lewis, who is currently the Senior Vice President at Commercial Banking at Community America. And along with that, she has a couple kids who are in college, and she's going to be talking about building credits and good money habits kids should build. And lastly, we have Heath Birch, who's going to be giving some tips on wealth management and investing. And he's really going to hit on the importance of starting investing early. Heath's been at Community America for 7 years now and has run wealth management for the last 3.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jack. We're excited to hear from all of them. But I want to start with Sam real quick, because we have the results of our first poll that we just talked about with banking basics, including budgeting and savings habits, and how small purchases add up. So what do we know now, Sam?
Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, so we asked you, what is the number one mistake that college kids said they made in high school? And above all, it was spending too much money on food. So Jack, do you have any experiences where you've done that?
I do. So I was actually one of those kids who spent too much money on food. I struggled with being able to say no to my friends. They would go out to eat almost every day, and I quickly realized I didn't have the money to do that. So I made a budget for myself, and I would only spend money on eating out once or twice a week, which I was only able to do because of how much I was working. Have you had any similar issues, Sam?
Yeah, totally. I mean, one summer, it was the first summer that I had a real job. I started getting those paychecks in, and I just started spending money on Chipotle burritos. And I would just spend so much money on Chipotle burritos. After a month, I looked at my Community America app and I was like, oh my gosh, I spent $100 on burritos in a month. So I was like, that was the point where I was like, okay, so those really do add up. So I wish my parents would have told me that those burritos add up, but I figured it out the hard way. So, but from that, I learned that checking your balance daily is super important to make sure that those purchases don't add up.
Definitely. Jamal, do you have any tips on this, or how important small spending can add up, and how important teaching financial literacy is?
Yes, of course. Being in the branch, I kind of see this stuff all the time with young kids, not, creating a budget and sticking to it. So in order to, successfully save money, I would say, create a budget, but track your spending for the first 30 days to see how, much of your money is allocated to food and like hanging out and having a good time with friends or, online shopping. Once you track those expenses for the first 30 days, you can go ahead and kind of look and see, okay, so last month I spent, $80 eating out. I spent, $90 on online purchases. Once you go ahead and, take a look at all your expenses for that month, you can go ahead and create either a spreadsheet or use a check register or something along those lines and create a budget. Sometimes, your spending can get out of habit if you're not really tracking it. So I would suggest if you're going to go and eat out with friends, uh, go to a place that's offering a deal where you don't have to spend a lot of money. Sometimes restaurants run specials during weekdays. Try going out on a weekday, or like making food at home and inviting friends over to hang out. That would be a great way to save money as well.
Yeah, that's a great smart money choice. You're thinking ahead and thinking of how you can save more money. But what are some other specific things that you think parents could tell their kids to make smart money choices?
Yeah. So if you're employed, if you have a summer job or a part-time job after school, making sure every paycheck that you get, first of all, make sure that your employer has direct deposit set up. If they have direct deposit set up, you can allocate in your deposits the amount of money you want to go to your savings account and the amount you want to go to your checking account. So the rule of thumb is try and save about 10% of your paycheck into your savings account. So once you set up your direct deposit, allocate that difference to go to your savings account and the rest to go to your checking account. And most parents, word of advice is to sit down with your kid and talk about budget and, needs versus wants, because sometimes as a kid, you think you need something really badly when you don't actually need it. So it's a need versus want. So just being smart about your spending, and if you can live without, this new T-shirt or hat, or live without going to a fancy restaurant with friends on the weekend, just prioritizing your finances.
Yeah, that's awesome. What are some other key things that every student should keep in mind about their accounts, and some other things that parents should reemphasize?
Okay, so most accounts, especially here at Community America with our online banking platform, a mobile banking, you can set alerts on your account. Those are reminders. So if you're going to go ahead and go over budget, if your account is going to fall below a certain amount of dollars, you can get an alert saying, "Hey, my account just fell below $50." Or if you have a large withdrawal come out of your account, you can get an alert on that. Or if a large deposit hits your account, you can set the dollar amount to give you that alert. We also have another great tool called Money Management that actually will track all your spending, and it will tell you where your dollars are actually going. So that will kind of keep you on track as well, so you're not going over your budget and spending too much money.
Awesome, Jamal. Thank you so much. So, what if my parents always give me money for food and kind of perpetuates that feeling of it's okay to spend money on food and those small purchases?
Well, I mean, if your parents continue to give you money for food, you can still go ahead and save that money. You don't have to actually spend that money on food, and you don't have to spend it all. So if you do want to go out and eat, you can be wise with the spending, depending on how much you're receiving from your parents. So you can go ahead and sock some aside, and then you can be a responsible person and say, "Hey, mom and dad, I actually don't need money, for food. I have some of the money saved up." So continue to save the money that you don't spend. You don't necessarily have to spend it all right away.
This is a problem that I actually see a lot because a bunch of kids in my school go and their parents will give them money for Starbucks or a breakfast sandwich or something almost every morning. And I don't think they add up or they understand how quickly it adds up. So these kids are spending their parents' money, and once it's time for them to spend their own money, they follow these same money habits and they just don't have the money to spend. Um, so yeah, I think that's one of the biggest problems that high schoolers face.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because if they continually get money from your parents and you don't know the concept of money, so when you do start to work, like have money of your own, uh, that's where kids get in trouble with your accounts. You can get overdraft fees and take your account into a negative balance because you keep using that card. And say if you use the card to go to Starbucks to buy a $5 drink, an overdraft fee runs about $28 at Community America. So that $5 drink end up costing you about $33. So you have to be wise when you start making your own money, making the right choices, and it's never too early to start saving money.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamal. So, how would a parent help their young adult understand needs versus wants in terms of budgeting and spending money?
Well, I think it all comes down to sitting down and having that conversation and say, hey, okay, so we're going to try and help you save money and put yourself on a budget. So you got to think when you go out with friends, or if you're home and you're on Amazon, you're looking at something new that just came out, you already have a pair of earbuds, for example, and Apple comes out with a new, set of earbuds. Do you actually need the new set of earbuds, or are the old ones still working fine? If the old ones are still working fine, you don't need to spend that extra $150 on a new set of earbuds if you don't have to. So it's just evaluating the situation, pointing out the most important things when it comes to a budget and sticking to it. So needs versus wants is, like I said, very important to distinguish between the two. And I think with parents sitting down, actually having those conversations and pointing out that stuff as to why you shouldn't spend your money on something that you already have, then that will make you understand the concept of saving money.
Sweet. But so before we go into some of the questions you parents asked, I have a couple takeaways and a good a little tip that a couple of my friends' parents used, and it really worked with them. So as you can see, budgeting is something that's really important for kids, and just being conscious of what's in your account and not overdrafting and all that stuff. But if you parents really want to give your kids money, which I don't think is a bad thing, but I think it's important that the kids learn how to budget if you're going to give them money. So I think one of the biggest things is that if you give your kid money, so here's a little thing I read off the internet. It says, if your child is supposed to pay for his toys or entertainment, it's not a good idea for you to pay for them whenever he's short of his funds. So kind of maybe give them like a weekly balance or a monthly balance. And say your kid goes and spends that money in a day, it's not a good idea for you to give them more money for the rest of the week. So they got to just tough it out. If they want to go to a movie with a friend or something, um, it's just unfortunate they're not going to be able to go because they already spent their allowance. And I think that's a great way for them to learn budgeting.
Yeah, I totally agree, Jack. So we will provide a checklist after this session that helps provide a baseline of financial milestones for high school and college students, and it includes a lot of the content that we just went over and will discuss later in this webinar. So that will be sent out via email. So we would like to take some questions from the registration link that everyone filled out when they registered for this webinar. And for Jamal, how can I encourage my child to budget and save effectively while still making sure they can have fun and don't stress out about it?
Well, going back to the point that Jack made about the article he read, you setting boundaries in place. So if they really want to, go out and have a good time with friends or buy something, they need to set themselves, and stick to their strict budget, because if the parent always goes and, hey, okay, I know you're short this time, here's $20, here's $20, here's $20, if they continue to do that, they don't understand the concept of saving and budgeting. So I think parents need to be, somewhat strict when it comes to these measures and making sure that the kids are actually sticking to their budget and not bailing them out every single time. Because if you give them money, today, and they come back and say, hey, I'm short another $10, can I have more money? Then the cycle, then you will never get any better. They will never learn the concept of saving and budgeting.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jamal. And I think Matthew's gonna take us to the next section now.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a lot of great information. And one thing that I found out about is that my uncle would encourage my cousins who are very young to save their money by saying, if you save $100 of your allowance, then I'll give you an extra $25 each year. So it's not necessarily a bank account, but it kind of gets them in that mindset of thinking about it. So that's another strategy that parents could potentially take to encourage their kids to be smart with how they're using their money. So next, we'd like to transition to talking about how to move from high school to college in terms of credit. So I'd like to bring on Jackson, who will get us started off on this.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. So yeah, I'm going to college next year. I'll be a freshman at KU. And one of the things I've been focusing on is getting a credit card and building credit, because I know that'll be hugely important in life. And strangely enough, when we asked the survey in the beginning, 51% of you guys said how to budget was our biggest concern. But when we conducted a similar survey last week for students, a huge majority said building credit was the biggest thing. And it made sense to me, because when I'm thinking about it, my parents never really talked to me about building credit. I learned the importance of not getting bad credit, but I never learned the benefits of a credit card. So I kind of had to do all my research individually, online and through YouTube. And I think that's definitely been something parents really could improve to really help their kids out in life. How do you feel about it, Eka?
Yeah, so similarly, I don't think my parents stressed too much about building credit, but they did allow me to get my first credit card at the end of my freshman year of college when I turned 18, even though they were kind of wary about me getting one, and it took a lot of convincing. And I think they were most concerned about me misusing it and just making my credit worse from the very beginning, because if I start at a low credit, it's going to be harder for me to build that in the future. But I came to a deal with them where I really only use it for small purchases a couple times a month, for little things like groceries and gas. And now I also have a rewards card through an airline that my family uses occasionally for larger purchases, and that's under my name. So both of those credit cards contribute to my credit. Liz, what are your thoughts? Am I using my credit card the right way? Should I even have a credit card?
Yeah, I think you're using it exactly the right way, and especially starting at 18 by getting a credit card for just small purchases. When my son went off to college, I kind of had the same fears, even being in banking as long as I have. I was like, oh, bad credit is worse than no credit at all. And so you tend to want to protect your kids from getting bad credit instead of really educating them on how to get good and build good credit. So exactly what you've done, Eka, of getting a credit card when you're 18, 19 years old and only using it for small purchases that you can pay off in full every single month is absolutely a good way to start having that report to the credit bureaus that you're responsible, you're paying on time, and you use money responsibly. Certainly by the time that you're in your senior year, looking at a rewards card, that makes sense as well. But definitely when you were 18 years old, starting off and paying it off in full every single month was the right way to go.
Yeah, and how about Jackson? Should he already have a credit card, or is he doing the right thing researching before he gets one?
always research before you get one, and I would recommend contacting your credit union or your bank and asking them what they have, because you already have a relationship with them. You already have your online banking, which is really important. Definitely take some time to research. I say, when you're getting your first card, make sure it has a low APR and no annual fee. You don't want to revolve on it. You want to pay it off every month, but if something happens and you do, you want to make sure that that's a low rate. Low APR cards typically won't have the same, airline rewards and things like that, but it's usually a really good card to start with. So I would start by contacting your local bank, credit union, doing the research that you've done, Jackson, and 18 or 19 is a good time to start that research.
Yeah, could you expand on that a little bit? Why is the going to college or turning 18 the perfect time to get a credit card?
Yeah. One, as long as you have the good habits. So as Jamal and everybody were kind of saying on the last call, or the last session, make sure you have really good budgeting and wants versus needs habits, that you've gotten into that in high school before you get to college. Then when you get to college, it really is about just using it to build credit. So starting at 18, using it for something like gas twice a month, paying it off completely. Then when you're 21, or when you're graduating college, 21, 22, 23, whenever that might be, you've already got that history in your name. So the likelihood that you'll need a cosigner when you're getting your first apartment, a car, or another loan, your likelihood that you'll need your parent to cosign will go down, because you already have some credit history on your own. If you haven't built any credit history on your own until you graduate, you'll probably still need a cosigner.
Yeah, and speaking of credit history, we know that obviously having a credit card contributes to your credit score, but what other things contribute to that? And how much does each portion affect the overall score?
Sure. Pretty much any type of loan that you're going to get is going to be reported and contribute to your credit score. Also, if you're, sometimes utilities do and sometimes apartments do, it really depends, but definitely any type of car loan, credit card loan, home loan, unsecured loan. Most of your score is made up of two things. So about 65 to 70% of your score is going to be made up of your payment history. So how well you're paying. So making sure that you never miss a due date. And then the amounts that you owe. So really trying to make sure that you don't revolve, or what they call utilization, a large percentage of your total card. So if you have $1,000 credit limit on your card, you want to keep whatever you're using on that card under 30%. So that will make up 60 to 70% of your score, which is why it's good to have good solid foundation of budgeting and payment habits. And the rest of your score is made up on how long you've had your card. So again, if you started at 18 or 19, 10% of your score starts getting made up later on by how long you've had your card. So when you're 21, 25, 30, you've had the history longer. And then just kind of your mix of credit and things like that. But most of it, if you can pay on time every single time, and you don't max out your credit cards, you'll be on a really good first step.
So what is the first step that parents should take to teaching their kids about credit?
I think what you guys were talking about with Jamal is key. You really have to make sure that you have a good budget and a good savings plan in place, and you understand wants versus needs. If you're in high school and you're used to your parents, kind of replenishing your food stock as far as your going out money, then your first year in college, you're used to that too. And all of a sudden you have a food plan, your cash is limited, so you can't go out to eat all the time. It's going to be tempting to use that credit card. So get that foundation in place first, of really good foundational spending budget habits. Know exactly what you're going to put on the card. And then really have a conversation with your child about the importance of savings. So if your car breaks down and you have a good savings account and it costs $300 or $400 to fix your car, being able to have that out of your savings versus having to put that on a credit card is really important. So good budget, good savings, and the importance of why good credit is an opportunity. I think that was what we had talked about earlier, is the idea of bad credit makes you stressed, but the idea of good credit should open up opportunities for you. And so just being able to educate your child on the importance of good credit.
Thank you for being here today with us, Liz.
Yeah, of course.
I have a few questions as well. So to start out, Are there any major do's and don'ts of credit cards that like parents should be able to teach their kids before they get their own card?
Yeah, the number one thing is pay your bill on time every single month. A payment that is 30 days late will stay on your credit report for 7 years. So you must pay your bill on time every single month. That will stick out for a very, very long period of time. It takes less time to get good credit than it does to come back from bad credit. So just pay your bill on time every single month would be the number one thing that I would ask parents to really educate their kids on. And then if you do find yourself in a predicament for whatever reason, it's the day after your payment was due and you're late, just call your bank. Don't be afraid to face money challenges head on because they're often not as big as you think. If you can face them head on and have a conversation with your bank, that is number one thing to do, and we'll be there to help you. We'll guide you through it. If you ignore them, they just get worse and we'll put you in a predicament later on. So that's my recommendation there is be open, be honest, and empower them to make good decisions.
Thank you. With your experience in banking and all that, do you know any misconceptions that parents could have about building credit or like opening cards for their kids?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes we want to, put them on as an authorized user, maybe on our card, which is certainly, a good tool for your kid to be able to have your card. Some companies, some credit card issuers report authorized users to credit bureaus and some don't. So you would want to know that before you added them on as an authorized user to know if it was going to help them in any way or not, because it's not 100% standard that those do. So that's one misconception, is that if I just add on my child as a authorized user, that they're somehow going to build up credit. Really ask the bank if they're reporting authorized users to the credit bureaus before you do that. So that's one misconception. The other one is that your kid is going to get in trouble. I think that if you have the conversation early and say, set up your auto pay so it auto pays the full amount every single month and only use it for, $50 or $100 a month for the first year. I think that when young adults are educated, that they make really great decisions on their own. They just have to be informed and foundationally already have good spending habits, because if you're used to going out to Chipotle and Starbucks every single day and that's your habit, and you go to college and you have this credit card with $1,000 on it, it's not going to take but a couple of months of Chipotle's before that thing's maxed out. So you just do not want to do that.
Thank you. Lastly, when I was doing my research to figure out what credit card would be best for me, I kept seeing there was like always comparisons between secured and unsecured cards. Each bank has their own, as well. They're like student specific cards for college. Which ones are best for young adults, and like how should parents and kids figure out which card would work best for them?
Yeah, I think doing exactly what you did, Jackson, which is doing your research. I think that both a secured card and an unsecured card will serve its purpose of helping you build credit. So if you look at your first card as the intent of that is to help you build a good credit history, a secured card or an unsecured card are both going to report your payment history, your line utilization, and things like that to help your score. A secured card works by you putting a deposit down, and typically that deposit will work as your credit line. So if you put down $500, that is your credit line. The thing that's important to understand as a young adult with a secured card, that's not a prepaid card. That's not like a $500 stored valued card that you can just kind of start whittling down. You still have to pay your credit card bill in full every single month, and that $500 is just kind of kept off to the side in case you ever don't pay. It's a refundable deposit. An unsecured card, your bank and your credit union can go ahead and give you a small limit to begin with, so $500 or $1,000, and then that limit will grow with you over time. So Eka, you might get your card when you're 18, it might have a $500 line. You've been super responsible with it, paying it off every single month. When you're 21, you'll find out that the card has a $2,000 line. So it really kind of grows with you to meet your needs. So I think both will do its purpose, provided again that you pay it off every single month and you don't max it out.
Well, thank you so much, Liz, for all the valuable information you just provided. Some resources we want to highlight are NerdWallet, which provides additional information about differences in various credit cards, like Liz just discussed, and the best one to choose for your kid. There's also a YouTube video with other do's and don'ts that will be sent out along with other resources after the webinar.
And before you go, Liz, we got quite a few amazing questions during the registration, and I wanted to highlight one of them. Someone asked, what are the top 3 ways to build your credit and for kids to build their credit? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think when we're talking kids, let's, we're focused on 18. So they're young adults. That's when they're going to be starting to really kind of build their credit. And the top 3 ways is a low limit credit card with good foundational spending habits would be the easiest way. Other things such as, if you're co-signing a car loan, that'll help build their credit. If you're co-signing with them on an apartment, that will also help build the credit. Any 3 of those would do it. The most common way is a low limit credit card. And again, you don't need to use it a lot. You can use it once a month, pay it off every single month. That would be the wisest thing to do, in my opinion.
Thank you. And lastly, are there any other ways for kids to build credit without a credit card, or is the credit card really that best way to get into building credit?
I think if you just look at it as any time that you're borrowing money, that you're building your credit. So anytime that you're borrowing money from a company, you're building your credit. So if that's a car loan, if that's a store loan, a student loan, anything like that will be being reported and building your credit. So just any of those things would work. A credit card is usually the smallest amount, because you're only going to have what you're spending on it as your loan.
Thank you so much for being here again,
Great
Liz.
questions. Yep, great questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing we talked about last week, Liz, was a conversation that I had with a friend that was scared of getting a credit card because he had seen his parents go into debt because of credit card debt. And I feel like that's a similar experience for a lot of people. So he was like, well, I'll just wait. I'll wait till I'm 25 and I really feel good about it, and then I can start. But obviously, as we've talked about, the problem with that is if you wanted to get an auto loan or an apartment and they wanted to pull a credit check, there would be no history. So a idea that we came up with is, well, why don't you get a card, and then to pay it off, you can just not take the physical card and only use online purchases with the card and subscriptions. So like an Amazon or a Spotify, that would only cost about $10 a month. And then just have that reoccurring purchase go on the card, set up with auto pay, and then you don't even worry about it. What do you think about that strategy?
Yeah, I think that is a great strategy. When you had mentioned that last week, I'm like, of course, that makes perfect sense. So Spotify is, $9.99 a month. It requires some sort of electronic payment to do it. So if you just did that $9.99 a month and you set it up for auto pay with your bank account, so it paid in full, and then you locked it away in your dorm safe, your credit card, and did not use it and did not carry it around with you, to me, that is a great tip. The goal here is to build credit, not to necessarily use a lot of credit. So I think that's important to kind of understand is building your credit is showing people that you're going to pay it. So your strategy there is perfect. It's not to use a lot of credit and to max out your credit cards. Nobody wants that for anybody, especially as you're starting off in life. So I think that's a great idea. And then just don't carry your credit card around with you. Keep it in your dorm safe. Use it for emergencies and your 1 or 2 purchases a month, and then pay it off.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much again.
Thank you.
We're going to transition now into our final section regarding investing and wealth management. So personally, my experience with investing, I started in about early April after my 18th birthday with investing, and I quickly realized the value of doing it early, not just because of the market gains, but because of the experience of watching my money go up and down. I remember the first 3 days were great. The money was going up. Then we had a big crash the next day, and I started losing sleep over it. Like, oh my gosh, my $40 is gone. But in reality, having that experience of watching the account go up and down was really, really great. So Jackson, what's your experience with investing?
Mine's pretty similar to yours, Matthew. I started investing, it's still June, right? Yep. Started investing late May last month. I wish I could have gotten in late March, but I didn't turn 18 until April. So I still tried to hit it when it was still pretty low. But I knew going in, I was doing it for the experience. I could understand how investing works. I wasn't ever really planning to make a huge profit off of it just because of how volatile the market is. And I think that's really crucial to understand for a lot of young investors. If they go in during a time like how it is now, if they expect to make profit and they're disappointed, they might not want to do it again, but it's important for them to understand the lessons that they're learning that they can contribute later in life when they have more and more money to invest.
Absolutely. So I want to bring in Heath Birch now, who, as we said, is the Director of Wealth Management at Community America. So Heath, over the last couple months, especially with the market being the way it is, there's been so many accounts that have been opened and people trying to put some money in the market to try to take advantage of it. But one thing is that a lot of parents are concerned that their kids may be skipping steps with investing. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a good point. Excuse me. I think that in order to invest and do it right, you think about trying to attach to some time of goal that's a few years out into the future. And if you skip steps, it makes it really hard to stay true to that plan. An example I would give you is if someone maybe didn't have a lot of money in savings. Maybe they hadn't started by creating that emergency reserve. And they got anxious because they thought there was an opportunity in the market. And as a result of that, they put their first $500 in an investment account. But then a month down the road, there's an issue with the car, some other expense that couldn't be avoided. You kind of deal with this internal pressure of feeling like the investment has to perform because there's a possibility you might need that money sometime soon. So it's really important, I think, to do things in the proper order. And us talking about wealth after the previous two sections makes perfect sense. I think unless you've kind of got a baseline of support in place. It doesn't have to be a lot of money, but enough of a cushion that you won't be nervous about watching your account go up and down like Jackson was just saying. And making sure that you're not trying to balance taking care of some debt that maybe should be addressed first while you're trying to invest. I think it allows you to carry a little more perspective into the investment. So, like you were both just relaying there, it's the first time you watch your account go down, you feel that a little bit, right? You have to learn how to internalize that. And if you haven't taken care of some other things first, it makes that really difficult. Whereas what I suspect you learned from that was that first $40 drop. And then you watched over the coming days, it recovered, right? There's going to be some volatility in the market. There always is. And it's much easier to manage that if you've done some other things first.
Yeah, exactly. It's no accident the way that we have this webinar set up where we talk about budgeting first and kind of the basics of money management to get kids going. And that's something they can start as young as 8 or 9. And then we move on to credit and then investing. And I think it's important to note that investing is the number 2 thing behind credit students wish their parents taught them about. So why do you think, Heath, that it's important to start investing at 18 instead of 22? And why do you think that most students don't?
Yeah, I'm even going to preface the answer to that in kind of piggybacking off what you just said. I think it's important for parents to understand that the generation of students that are now approaching age 18 are interested in this. I had found a poll that had basically asked those between the ages of 15 and 25 that had investment accounts, when did they first start researching personal finances? And the average age was 13. So this is a generation that is engaged and has a lot of tools and resources available to them. So I think starting early, it was mentioned earlier, I think it's really more about the experience and not just learning from things you've done right, but maybe more importantly, learn from things that you've done wrong that outweigh the financial benefits. Now, I don't want to make light of the fact that starting earlier can be a huge advantage. And so, I've referenced the clients that kind of have a hard time finding some momentum to start, that if you took an investor at the age of 25 and just asked them to start putting $100 a month away, and then had another investor start at the age of 35, right? So one's got a 10-year head start, and not to make light of it, but at $100 a month, we're talking about a total difference of $12,000 over the decade, right? But if you then fast forward on to the age of 65 and just obtained an average rate of return of 5%, the person who started 10 years earlier has twice as much money by the time they retire at 65. So, there's 2 parts to it. There's the educational process, which is probably the most important at the age of 18. and frankly can start even earlier for students who are interested and whose parents are willing to be engaged in the process. And then there's the financial component of just allowing time to work in your favor. And so you're going to have good years in the market and bad years in the market. But obviously the trend is your friend in this, right? And so for someone who's willing to start early, and again is putting it away for the right reasons, they're not putting it away because they might need it in a year or two, they're putting it away because they want to save for some future goal. There's a huge opportunity there to start a little bit earlier, even if you start with a small dollar.
Right, exactly. And I think what you just touched on is super important, that you have to be thinking long-term and that students should really be thinking long-term. It's not one of those deals where, oh, I'm going to buy into Tesla right now and a year later it's just going to skyrocket. There's no guarantees of that, but rather if you would have invested in 2015 in any number of stocks, or even just in the market in general, even despite, the worst crash in the history of the market, which has been this year, you still would have come out with quite a bit of return. So like you said, the trend is your friend. But with that, how easy is it today for people to open an investing account? I know we talk a lot about Robinhood because that's a really popular one right now, but how easy is it to just open one right now?
Yeah, it's never been easier, and it's really because of two factors. The first of which is just technology kind of making it available to the masses. And so 20 years ago, if someone were to have called me to open a brokerage account, there would be a paper process and an approval process, and there just would have been some barriers to entry, and they weren't insurmountable, but they're certainly not like today where, I would use the example of helping my 11-year-old son open an account, and we had it open in 5 minutes. And so technology certainly has helped that process. I think the other thing is that there aren't the barrier and fees and expenses that there might have been sometimes. So, you mentioning Robinhood is a good example. There's the ability now for someone, whether they're wanting to own a couple of stocks, whether they're wanting to buy an ETF or an exchange traded fund, whether they want to own a mutual fund, they can do it both in opening an account pretty quick and do it without any real expenses paid to that brokerage. And so whether you're using Robinhood or a Fidelity or Schwab or any number of other companies, there just aren't the transactional costs there once were that might have made it such that you wouldn't have wanted to start investing quite yet until you had a larger dollar amount. I would encourage somebody to start with the first $10 if they want to just learn about the markets and kind of understand the dynamics of opening an account and making investment selection. There's really no dollar amount that's too small to start.
Thank you, Heath. Besides for just investing in stocks, ETFs, mutual funds, and all that, I know a huge investment that can be made young is a 401k or a Roth IRA. What are the differences between those types of accounts, and why should parents emphasize the importance to their kids of investing in retirement when it might not even be on our radar?
Yep. It is something my poor kids are going to be hammered on when they get that first job. So I'll separate the two out. Let's just talk about the difference between the two first, and then we'll maybe talk about their use. So a 401k, as most everybody who's listening to this knows, is kind of the primary retirement vehicle available to employees of companies. It is a way for us to be able to put money in pre-tax, grow that money for retirement, and benefit from the fact that not only did I not pay taxes on that money when I contributed it, but it's going to grow tax-free until I use it. And so as it relates to your kids, I would suspect that most of the parents listening to this would think back to when they had the opportunity to invest in their first 401k. And for many, they delay that start. But for others, maybe they look back and say, I wish I would have been more aggressive in how much I invested. I could have afforded to invest a little bit more. So the 401k, at least at this time, is still the primary tool that most people build their wealth. And numbers will show that outside of somebody's primary residence, it's typically somebody's largest asset. For those who were aggressive savers and started early, it becomes your biggest asset. That one you have to have an employer to be able to invest in, right? Or you have to have a business yourself. Roth IRA is a little bit different. You have access to it with your first dollar of income, and you can set it up as an individual taxpayer. So you don't have to have an employer to do this. You don't even really have to be working. You could be working a part-time job someplace and decide that you got an extra $25 a month and you could open your Roth IRA. And so the Roth IRA to me is the most single impactful retirement planning tool available really to any of us. And that I think is regardless of age. It gives someone the ability to make contributions into a retirement. And while you don't get an upfront tax deduction, you enjoy tax deferral, during the entire time the account grows. And once you reach retirement and start making distributions, you enjoy tax-free distributions. So you think about an asset where you can contribute money for, if you're to start at 18, you're probably talking 40 some years, right? You can make contributions into an account where someday you won't pay any taxes on that. That's a really powerful tool. And as it relates to your kids, it's just a good opportunity to teach them about money. I've got a number of clients, and what they simply do is they end up, they could employ their son or daughter, or their son or daughter could have a part-time job and make a couple $1,000s. I've had clients who say, listen, I'm going to take $2,000 and contribute it into a Roth IRA on your behalf because you're allowed to do so because of the income you've generated. And just use that as a tool to help students learn about investing and kind of facilitate that process early on. I think if you get somebody started early and allow them to work through maybe some initial mistakes and just get comfortable, you set them on the path to be savers for their entire life because they will begin to see the benefit of those accounts growing. It's just a really important thing you can do for your child to kind of help get them on a path towards independence.
Thank you. And one last question before you go. How can or should both kids and parents, investors, get into investing when the market is how it is? Like, do you have any general recommendations of how to be safe but also risky?
Yeah, no, it's a good question because it can be, you can sometimes be overwhelmed by the number of available options. And, I think you can be, if not overwhelmed, you can use what's happening in the world around you as an excuse not to start. So the first thing I would say is just be willing to start small. Don't overcomplicate the process. Don't feel like either you or your student have to have it all figured out. It doesn't have to be thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. It could be just an intentional decision. We're going to start saving and look at it as a progression. So remember we talked earlier about the idea that this money should be attached to some form of a goal or a plan, right? And so that may mean that if money is sitting in savings and you say, I'm just ready to earn a little bit more interest, but I might need access to this, then it might just mean you're opening up a CD or a money market that's just going to pay marginally more interest than what you have in a checking or savings account. But when you progress beyond that and you say, I have an emergency reserve, I feel comfortable that if something happens in the coming months that I need a little bit of money for, I've got a place to go get it. And now we've moved into investing, just don't complicate it. Your first investment could very easily be an S&P 500 index, just an ETF that mimics the S&P 500, and start to understand the movement in that and how you buy that. And I'm not going to encourage anybody to day trade, to feel like you're going to game the market. Not only are students not going to do that, your parents aren't going to do it, and professional money managers aren't going to do it, right? That's been proven over time. So it's really more about the act of starting to invest. Take a good measure of your own personal risk. If you're not going to do it on your own, look to somebody in your life who has some experience with this or to a professional that might be able to help you analyze that and understand what level of risk you want to take. Because Jackson, the way you ask a question, be safe and be aggressive both is really hard, right? But that's the question sometimes you get. Somebody will say, oh, I don't want to lose any money, but I'd like to make 10%. Well, my job would be very easy if that was a thing. And so you really have to take account of what somebody's goals or aspirations are for that money, and then that will walk you towards the right investment.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Heath. Two quick takeaways and two kind of concrete things I think parents should know that we've kind of come up with. If your child is looking to get into investing, one thing that I've done that has been successful is just start small, like you said, maybe do a S&P 500 or the full Vanguard Total Index Fund, something like that, an ETF that captures the whole market, and just watch your money go up and down for about a month and get used to that so that you're not trying to, pick a certain company, but you're just really going with the whole market and just getting used to that fluctuation of going up and down. And then the second thing, I know there's been a lot of questions about kids that are spending a lot of time researching. I think it's a great thing that kids are looking to research. But one trap that I got into is I started looking at the same resources over and over again instead of having a plethora of resources. So we put together a list of resources that you guys can use so that everybody can have a diverse group of advice and then make decisions based on what they think from all of that. So a couple of those resources, starting with the Young Money podcast. That's a podcast that I host with a friend, and it's designed for kids and millennials that are interested in investing and in money management. So if you want more information on that, you can go to youngmoneypodcast.com. Also, all of Dave Ramsey's suite of products, especially that investment calculator that he has on his website. It's a really great visual representation of how your money can grow really fast. The Robinhood Snacks podcast is a great podcast about little nuggets of financial news that you wouldn't know about, and it's very funny as well. Investing for Dummies, Bankrate.com, NerdWallet, those are all great websites. Another thing that we're going to be sending out tomorrow is a brand new checklist from Community America about just everything that we've talked about today in a very succinct form of a checklist that we can do. Also, your banker or your financial advisor at your bank or credit union is a great resource that you can always use. Having that in person is always a big thing, I guess now either in person or over Zoom with how the world is today. One thing I did want to bring Liz back on real quick just to talk about an account that you could set up at Community America that would give you 4% savings. So Liz, can you talk about that and how that might be a good resource for kids that are just looking to see the power of compound interest?
Yeah, this is just me as a parent. So one of the things that I did is I've got a 14-year-old, 16-year-old, and 21-year-old. And the first thing I've had them each do is open up the high interest savings account. So the one that we have at Community America right now is 4% up to $1,500. And you don't have to be a kid to use that. So for me, for them, that was just an easy way right off the bat that they can be getting 4% on those. So I've had them do that. Then they got to open their debit cards, and then my son, his credit card. So really kind of that whole path of savings, budgeting, and then building credit. So that is something that I would look at a good interest earning savings account, look at your CDs, and then look at the options that Heath provided as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I want to ask Jamal a quick question. Since you are a banker, a financial advisor at a credit union, what is it like when you see somebody come in, and what services do you give them to help them manage their budget?
Okay, so a lot of times when members walk in asking for help, we typically sit them down in a room and just go over their overall budget and see where their spending is going, first of all, because we can eliminate a lot of wasted money by just going over the things that they're paying for. And I always recommend to members to go ahead and have reviews due on your cell phone bill, because the contract you might be in right now on your cell phone bill might be an old contract, and you're paying a lot more money for that phone service when you can just go into the store and have them take a look at your contract and see if they can save you some money by reducing the bill. Also, the same thing applies with insurance. So if you have an auto loan or a car and you're paying insurance each month, sometimes a review over your insurance will be great, because you can go ahead and save money that way. Personally, I've done both, and I've saved money on my insurance and on my phone bill. So just having those conversations, seeing where the spending is going, and giving that advice to the member.
Thank you so much. We're now going to transition to try to answer a few of your questions right here at the end. So let's go through and look at one real quick. Let's see. My 16-year-old daughter has her first summer job. Right now, she was depositing her paychecks into her checking account. Is there a better way to earn for her to earn interest on her money, or perhaps a way to invest it? So what would you recommend for that?
I can take a crack at that one. So that's the appropriate place to start. And I would caution you against worrying too much about additional interest if it's a modest dollar amount every month. I think it's more about trying to build good habits. And so maybe a way to build off that is look at the checking account as just a foundational account. And if there's a small amount of overage every month that you just don't think is necessary for the in and out, start an automatic transfer to a savings or a money market account. Look at it as kind of building a pyramid for yourself. So there's the in and out account that your daughter's going to use from time to time. There's the savings account, which gives you some reserves. And then if you get through that and you find that there is still some additional money, or maybe we've done a good job of saving and the savings account has a little mass to it, then look towards maybe a brokerage account and making that first investment that might introduce a little bit of risk, but opportunity for more return.
Thank you. Liz, this next question might be for you. Patricia asked, does Community America offer a secured credit card for young people to build credit?
We don't offer a secured credit card at this time, but it is definitely something that we are working on, and so we'll hear in the future. But we do have our unsecured cards with low lines, so $500 to $1,000 that we could provide for the student with a low rate.
Thank you. Heath, someone asked, can my son start investing now if I'm also on his account? He is not 18 yet.
Yeah, so I can speak to that from experience. I've got 3 boys who are 12 and under, and my 11-year-old has taken up some interest in it. And obviously 11, he doesn't have a great understanding of what it means yet, but I want to feed that curiosity and kind of help him through that. So I've just made it easy for him where I transfer him $25 a month, and it goes into a brokerage account, and him and I are talking through what he wants to invest in. So as an 11-year-old might, his first stocks were Disney and Nike. And whether or not those are good or bad investments, I don't care. To me, this is more about kind of fostering that interest and letting him understand it at a young age. And he can't act without me, and so I'm a joint owner on the account. But what I hope happens is that it continues to foster some interest on his part and helps him understand the positives and the negatives and the good feelings and the bad feelings. And as he gets a little bit older, maybe he'll have a little more financial maturity. So that's doing it out of step, right? We talked earlier about the idea of savings first, investing second. But for an 11-year-old who I don't expect to pay rent or pay for his own stuff, I will take care of that, and I will help him learn about the investing side until we get a little bit older.
Thank you. Jamal, this one might be for you next. Halston asked, what is the best advice you could give to me about becoming a single father recently as far as finances go?
Okay, so it's a good question. So typically you would have to reevaluate your entire, income and budget, because if you were once a 2-income household and you're now down to 1 income, obviously you'll have to make cuts and changes. And it's all a matter of just looking at the budget again, seeing where your dollars are going to, where you're spending money, and where you think you can make those cuts. And sometimes it can be difficult to make those changes and make sacrifices in order to stay in budget. But if you ever need help with something like that, you can always come to someone here at Community America, and we'll go ahead and sit down with you and come up with a plan that will help you stay on track and without sacrificing too much.
Thank you. Let's see, good one. Cyril asked, so spending money on food is a liability. Sam and Jack, I know you guys both have expressed your experiences with spending money on food. Would you consider that a liability?
Yeah, well, I would definitely not say it's a liability per se, but in moderation is definitely the way to go for spending money on food, and definitely using some of those tactics we talked about with Jamal, just checking your bank account frequently, trying to budget, making sure that those small purchases don't add up. And I think with all of that, it becomes less of a liability and more of just something to look for.
I agree with that.
Alrighty, let's answer one more before we go in our closing. So let me see. Michelle Forgas asked, my daughter is currently 15 and needs to be set up with an account. Will Community America allow daily text of her balance?
Yeah, so when you set up an account here at Community America and you want to set up alerts on your account, it gives you the option to customize those alerts. So you can go ahead and set whatever alerts you want on your account. So low balance, you can choose the dollar amount, a large deposit. When the account falls below a certain limit or balance, it will give you that information too. It will text you it. So you can set up whatever you want to customize it to your liking.
As a parent, one of the things that I did is my kids opened up their Community America account, and then I was added onto their online banking into their account. So when I log into my online banking, I can see their account and I can transfer money into it. When they log into their online banking, they can't see into mine. So that's a great tool. And then when my son turned 21, I turned that off. I turned my access off so he could be completely on his own. So that's something, as well as the text alerts. If you wanted as a parent to be able to have some insight into that, you could do that as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I think that's a good way to end it, because we're talking about how kids and parents can work together to help educate their kids. I think something that I've learned from this entire experience of doing this webinar is that kids are really, really interested in learning about money, more so than really any other generation. And so they need that parent support. So there's been so much great information that's been shared today. We'll make sure to send out those additional resources, and we will try to answer the Q&A questions that did not get answered after this webinar. So if you didn't have a question answered, you can stick around, and we will make sure to get that answered for you. We will also send out this presentation, all the answered questions from the Q&A, and the recording of this video if you want to send it to anybody else. Next week's webinar session will be confidence. Confidence will be today at 4 p.m. for kids. And then education will be July 7th at 4 p.m. I know there were a lot of questions about college and career planning, so we'll be covering that. Also, we have an exit survey for you to fill out. If you could fill that out and give us some advice, what you liked, what you didn't, and how we can better improve, we would greatly appreciate that in the exit survey. And with that, we will go ahead and answer those other questions. But for everybody else, thank you so much for attending today, and hope you have a great day.
Thank you, Matthew. Let me look through what else we've gotten. Anonymous has a really good question. I've actually questioned it myself before. What happens to credit if you have a credit card but you never use it?
It'll show on your report that you have a card. It'll report the line and no utilization. And then at some point, that credit card company might reach out to you asking if they can close your card. But for your credit report, it would just show out there as an open line that you're not using.
Thank you.
And another key point too, Liz, to go back on that question too.
Please.
One thing that I experienced with members who do have credit cards and that's the only trade line they have, if they haven't used it in a long time, the credit score that they potentially built up can actually go away. So it's important to, be smart with the use of the credit card and use it at least once a year if you can, to keep that credit line going, or that score going.
Yeah, I agreed completely. It's kind of a mix of all the different types of credit that you have. So good point on that, Jamal.
Alrighty. For our last question of the day, Jenny Palmer asked, what are some good credit cards for kids to start with? Eka, would you like to talk about anything with your experiences, since I know you have your own credit card?
I started with a card through my bank. That was just the easiest route for us since I already had a checking account through them, and it was really easy. I already had the online banking, so it probably just took a few minutes. My parents just accompanied me. As far as the second card that my family has, it's just through an airline. And my family already has experience with that card, so or with that company, so it's one that we really trust.
Yeah, and with that, I would just say on the credit cards that I've started with bank, and that's been a good way to go. But I've seen the progression for credit cards for my parents, and because they've been able to be more financially stable, we've been able to really utilize kind of the highest tiers of those points that you can get, and so that's kind of another incentive to build your credit early. Because you can really make a lot happen with those points. We've paid for quite a few trips just based on points alone with regular spending. So it really can be a good resource if you're smart with how you do it at the beginning.
Yeah, I totally agree with you both, Eka and Matthew, that really it's where you are in your life and what you're trying to do is where that card's going to fit. So if you start with your bank on both sides of that, or your financial institution, tell them, are you trying to build credit, or are you trying to maximize purchase rewards? And you pay off every month. Two different strategies, probably two different types of cards for those. So just knowing which ones those are and jumping in and having a conversation is a great way to go.
We have one more question. What is the minimum amount needed to start a Roth account? Heath, can you answer that real quick?
Sure. It's the barrier's going to be low. It's going to depend on the company that you deal with. But there are some custodial companies that will open Roth for $25 on front, so it's a pretty low barrier.
Very good. All right, and we will go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you so much again for attending, and we hope you have a great day.
Bye.